Okay. Lesson 5 of Moses, Lessons from the Wilderness. Opening activity. So our question is, what constitutes a wilderness? For you, what is a wilderness like?
Oh, wilderness is, there's nothing growing there.
Nothing growing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no trees, no, usually people don't live there. So no houses.
It's funny, you know, when I think of wilderness, I'm reminded of when I was 6 or 7 years old in Massapequa Park. It was during that time that Davy Crockett was big on TV, on Disney, and so everything was wilderness, okay? But we played in the woods.
Right.
And there were trees and bushes and all kinds of things, you know. So the wilderness there was where there was nothing built. You know, there were no paths, there were no walkways. You know, it was just woods, right? And but it was destitute. You know, you were cut off from everybody else. You were just in a world of your own.
World of your own. Okay, so think about a time in your life when you experienced wandering in the wilderness. What was the cause? Was it of your own making, or were there circumstances beyond your control? And what were your emotions during that time? Which, a lot of questions. What challenges did you face? How did you get through it? And what did you learn?
Well, growing up on Long Island, I didn't come across any wilderness. Can't say I
Right.
wandered in the wilderness.
Well, I was a Boy Scout, so there was once when I got lost in the woods.
Ooh.
That was terrible. And then there was one time when we went camping and we walked for 2 weeks. We went to the big camp, National Boy Scout camp, and for 2 weeks we lived in tents in New Mexico. There was a big difference because in the first case, when I was lost, I was not in control, and it was my emotions. I panicked. I was young, and I was lost until I
Were
calmed
you
down.
alone? Or were you
Yeah.
with
No, I was walking I was at the Boy Scout camp in New Jersey, and I had to go back to the campsite. We were in a meeting, and I had to go back to the campsite to get my backpack.
Oh,
And I knew a shortcut, which I had been on a whole bunch of times, no trail or anything, but this time I got lost. And there was a stream in the middle of this shortcut. And once I calmed down, I went to the stream and I started walking along the stream, and I remembered like a big rock or something like that. And then I was fine. And then I wasn't lost anymore. But while I was panicking though, I was completely out of control and no hope of finding my way.
yeah.
So the big difference between, you know, like the question is saying, is whether or not I was in control. The second time we were in control and it was fine. You know, we were on a camping trip.
Right.
When I think of a wilderness, sometimes it's not always a physical wilderness. It's
Right.
an emotional wilderness.
Right.
So when I'm home by myself and I have nothing to do, sometimes the wilderness can take me into negative thoughts. And so I have to leave and go do something. And that will get me out of the negativity.
So what was the cause of that?
Sometimes it could be a program that I'm watching because then I'm reminiscing about my history, my past. And sometimes it will just it'll bring up good memories, but sometimes those memories are hard.
Okay, so it kind of triggers,
Yes, it triggers emotion.
yeah.
And so then I have to, so it's not always a physical wilderness that you could be in. It's sometimes an emotional wilderness.
Right.
That, we would call that today post-traumatic stress, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
True, yes, yes, very true.
Trauma that you're recalling later
Yeah,
on.
that
Yeah,
would
Right.
be-
yeah.
But I think a wilderness can also be an emotional thing where you're not, you know, you're wandering, you don't feel connected or, you know, in control of things.
Right, very true. Yes,
So it can be very frightening, um,
yes,
very depressing, I suppose.
yes.
Mhm.
How'd you get through it?
I take myself out of the area that I'm in. I'll go to the store.
Oh, okay. Physically.
I'll change programs on TV. I'll pick up my devotional booklet and I'll read scripture,
Mhm.
various ways.
Yeah, good.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I don't know if it's really a wilderness, but I think about the time when Laura, our oldest daughter, had a stillbirth. And it was just kind of your world turned upside down. You know, here you had everything ready for this baby and, you know, and, you know, it kind of shocks you beyond belief. And, you know, you kind of don't know quite where to go.
Right.
I think that would be kind of like a wilderness in a way.
Yep. Absolutely.
And I guess a certain aspect of it is the sense of being on your own, by yourself.
Right.
It's hard to be in the wilderness when you're with a lot of other
Right.
people,
Right, right.
but I guess it's possible, right?
If somebody's really, really depressed, they could be sitting in the middle of
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
chaos and nobody even realizing it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
You know, they're quiet and you don't want to know the turmoil that they're experiencing.
Mm.
And I remember at that time, you know, like being kind of mad at God, like, you know, I prayed this morning that this baby would be born safely. And then, you know, a few hours later, I get a phone call that didn't happen. And, but I think believing in God is what got us through it. I know it's what got Laura through it. Yes.
Mhm.
As much as she got through it. Yeah.
Was that Jacob?
No.
Yeah,
This.
yeah.
Oh, yes,
Yeah, Jacob,
yes. Her
right.
Jacob. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Jacob?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Well, yeah.
Jacob's well.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it was, yeah.
Okay.
So, opening prayer. Eternal God, we have sometimes known times when we wandered in our wilderness, we wondered if our wilderness wanderings would ever end. In those times, we have longed to break free from uncertainty, apprehension, and negativity. Guide us now as we seek to learn what you would have us know about such times, that we may embrace your promises more fully. For we ask it in the name of Jesus Christ, who knew what it was to experience the loneliness and the trials of wilderness. Amen.
Okay, this looks like it's the video. We'll see what happens when we try to get it going. Does anything come on the video?
Well, right now it's a dark screen.
Loading, you see that?
No, well, I don't see the loading, but I see the arrow on it, the little blue arrow and the black screen. So
Right, it's just a black screen, a
Okay,
blue screen.
I'm sure it'll come on.
Yeah.
There you go.
goes.
Very good. Thank you.
sitting here in the valley, which would have been the place of the encampment of the Israelites. So if you can imagine, for nearly 2 years, the Israelite nation, the people, camped out in this vast space and surrounded by the mountains. And of course, in this direction, Mount Sinai. You see a cemetery here at the base of Mount Sinai today. But looking this direction, as Moses had gone off in the distance, gone for 40 days at one point, and then coming back down, and the people dwelling here. While Moses is on top of Mount Sinai, God gives explicit instructions for the building of a dwelling place for God, a house of God among the people. And it would be like their houses, a tent, something that could be moved easily. It was called the tent of meeting, or the tabernacle, and it was both a place of worship, but it was also the symbolic house of God among the people. And interestingly enough, 15 chapters of the book of Exodus is dedicated to describing this. So from chapter 26 through chapter 40, most of those chapters describe both the design of this particular place, this tent of meeting, describes the material that should be used. It describes the patterns that should be woven into the fabric. Now, when we think about what this was patterned after, Moses had an idea, and certainly God gave him directions as to what this should look like, but it was patterned clearly after two things in ancient Egypt's experience. One was the portable tent or dwelling place of Pharaoh. So when Pharaoh would lead his armies off into battle, he had his own tent. And when we look at the tent of meeting, or the tabernacle, God was their king in their midst. His tent was set up in the middle of the camp, and the Israelites' tents were all around it, just as it happened with Pharaoh's tent and the armies of Egypt. This tent was also patterned after the great temples in Egypt. So in the temples of Egypt, you find the Holy of Holies, the most holy place where the idol was kept. And then you find an outer courtyard. And then you find the larger courtyard where altars were, where people would make sacrifices. You can still see the altars in these temples in Karnak and in Luxor. And I'd like to take you back there right now. So we've come here to Thebes, the ancient capital of Egypt, what is today Luxor. So a visit to Luxor wouldn't be complete without a stop at the Luxor Temple. And you've got to see this, it's amazing. As we walk through it, I want to remind you that the pattern of the tabernacle and ultimately the temple in Jerusalem is patterned after these kinds of temples. And earlier we saw the ruins of the temple in Goshen that Ramses II had built. Ramses II helped build portions of this temple as well. So we're going to go inside and take a look at it, and ultimately I'm going to take you down to the Holy of Holies. Let's go inside. So we've come through roughly 2 or 3 football fields length as we're walking through the temple. We've come to the holiest place in the temple, the Holy of Holies. So as you walk into this room, now the alcove was not originally there. That was added during the Christian era. The 2 columns on either side also added. In the end of the age of the pharaohs, there was a room that was added in the back. But during the time of Ramses II, it was just this room. That's where it stopped. This was the Holy of Holies. And so when you walked in, there was an altar where sacrifices were made, much like the sacrifices described in Leviticus. There was an image of the god. And so Amun is the chief god of Egypt, the creator god, the god of the sun. And he would have been, his statue, his idol would have been about this tall. And then the altar in front. So let's go inside and we'll take a look around. So here in the Holy of Holies, the walls are adorned with the same image over and over and over again, actually 2 images. The first one is Ramses II offering a sacrifice to the god Amun, again, the chief god of the Egyptian pantheon. This entire temple is dedicated to him. And then over here you find Amun pronouncing his blessings upon Ramses II. And so his hand upraised, pronouncing his blessings. That's repeated over and over on these walls. So I've shown you the Holy of Holies that was built in the time of Ramses II. This temple actually predated Ramses II. He remodeled it and added to it and made most of the things you see in it today were built by Ramses II. There are actually 3 Holy of Holies here, and this is the original, this is the first one. And once more in the scenes, what you find, just like in the Ramses II Holy of Holies, is that you find the Pharaoh offering sacrifices to the god Amun. And you'll see the table with the sacrifices here, you see them in his hands up here. And so once more, the Holy of Holies in these temples was where the sacrifices were offered to the god. Food, grain, animal sacrifices were offered to the gods, the same as what we see in the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle that God gave instructions for Moses to build. So once more you see the connection between all of these things. So behind me is the Temple of Karnak. This is one of the largest temple complexes in the world, 60 acres, the largest in Egypt proper. And this temple complex, built over a period of 1,000 or more years, was also the site of learning for everyone in Pharaoh's household. So Moses would have come here and would have studied as a boy. He would have grown up learning here. Aristotle even, centuries later, studied here at Karnak. Moses would have studied theology, he would have studied astronomy, history, science, mathematics. All of this shaped the man that he became. And it was, of course, in this temple, once again, that we see a pattern for what temples looked like in Egypt and what became a pattern for the tabernacle that Moses was instructed to build by God. So let's go and explore the temple at Karnak. So we've come through about 400 yards of temple here at Karnak Temple. Multiple temples, of course, on either side of Karnak Temple. But here we come to the Holy of Holies. And on either side of me are columns that were erected by King Tut, Tutankhamun. And he was portrayed as both male and female, as his father had begun to think of God as carrying the attributes of both male and female. Let's go inside. So as you come inside the Holy of Holies, part of what you see is the altar in the back. When the offerings were going to be brought by the king, the high priest would take the idol out. He would march it all the way through the temple, again, about 400 yards, maybe more. And then the king, the pharaoh, and the high priest would bring the idol back in, set it here, and then the offerings would be distributed throughout the temple. What was different for Moses was that God was not portrayed by an idol or a graven image, but instead there was only a throne, the mercy seat of God on top of the Ark of the Covenant, and God was invisible. And there weren't all of these other pantheon of gods. For Moses, of course, there was just one God. And that God created everything that exists. And that God transcends. You can't see this God. Only you can see his glory. So let's return to the Sinai, where the Israelites would wander for 40 years through the wilderness. As you're passing through the Sinai Peninsula, part of what you see, the terrain changes just dramatically. I mean, every few minutes you look and you go, oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. It's the desert Southwest multiplied. I mean, it's just amazing. But as I was looking around, I'm thinking, okay, the Israelites saw this. The Israelites would have experienced this. They would have passed through, and I'm thinking about taking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people on this journey for 40 years and camping out in places like this. At certain points, it's desert, it's sand and just what appears to be a wasteland. But in other places, oases, and every time you turn around, different rock formations. But I want you to imagine, as you're here and you hear the Israelites complaining and grumbling about where they're living compared to living in the land of Goshen. They complain because they don't like the food. They complain because they don't like the water. They complain because they don't like where they're staying. They complain. They grumble against Moses. And what's interesting is each time, of course, Moses goes back to God and he laments to God, why did you call me to lead these people? And meanwhile, the children of Israel are thinking, we had it so much better back in Egypt, forgetting what it was like to be slaves. We had it so much better there, failing to trust in the promise of the promised land. And so at one point, Moses comes out to the wilderness. He comes out, and I picture it someplace like this. He comes out and he begins to cry out, God, why? Why did you call me to lead this people? Now I'm paraphrasing, kill me now. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to lead these people anymore. But God encourages him to persevere. And this is one of the keys to leadership. Really, whatever you're doing in leadership, you're gonna find people complain, they grumble, they don't like the way you're doing it. If you don't want people to complain against you, don't be a leader. That's just part of leadership, is you're gonna have people who don't like the way you're doing it. And sometimes you listen to them and you adjust and you adapt, and sometimes you say, no, this is the right way to go. And that's part of what I love about Moses. He wanted to give up, he didn't give up, he persevered, and ultimately he led the children of Israel to the promised land.
And we're back in position.
Before you go on, I just want to say the one word I got out of that was perseverance. That was really good.
Me too.
Must have been very hard for me because God provided manna. I forget now what it consisted of, but they were trying to do.
Right.
So,
Rocks.
yes.
Yeah.
I just walking. It's not even a smooth path. It's like, it's the, no shade, except.
Yeah. We complain about the heat here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how many people were actually migrated there?
At least. Yeah.
100,000?
600,000 the Bible says.
600,000?
Wow.
All right, so we're going to talk about complaining. Have there been times in your life when you complained a lot?
No. Let's go to the next step.
What did you learn from those experiences?
I complain initially when I get a lot of work, I tend to complain. And then no big deal, I just reaction.
Hmm.
Doesn't get anywhere. I
No.
can complain and just like,
I know.
I just give up on it. It's not worth it.
Yeah. It doesn't do any good.
I mean, if there's something I can, rather than complain about it, I'll seek a way of changing how I perceive it or how I respond to it. Just complaining.
Yeah.
I have to agree with that. Many times when I've complained, and I don't want to admit that I don't, but I have. But it really isn't, it's really in our perception of things. And we have to ask God to change our perception of what we see so that we can change our attitudes. So.
Very true.
So what did you learn from reading about the Israelites' complaint?
To me, they were pretty legitimate.
Yeah.
They dragged them out to this desert and they just, what were they doing initially for food? I guess they were really told not to really pack anything, right?
Right.
Yeah.
God provided manna.
Yeah, but that seemed like it was down the line of it. It wasn't like the first couple of days that they were traveling. And to carry their tents. It's like some of the stuff is like we're told to leave everything and just come. So obviously somebody carried their tents.
So yeah, they had to have some stuff.
Right,
But it reminded me of human nature where, you look back and, they kind of forget all the bad stuff and selective remembering of things. Yeah. List the pros and cons for the Israelites' life in Egypt versus their life in the desert.
Yeah, this is what I always think about when they're complaining. There was a guy who was part of one of the leaders of our prison ministry who preached in the prison chapel one time, and he was preaching about when they were talking about Egypt and how they had cucumbers and all these great vegetables. At least that's what I was trying to remember how to say that. And he showed it at Goshen, how it was and stuff. But this leader, he said, yeah, but they're delusional because they forget they were slaves. They weren't they weren't sitting around eating these wonderful meals and stuff. They were working themselves to death. And he said, that's just like us when we say, oh, the good old days. Remember the good old days, how great it was, back then? Everything was so great. So it's like, I really like that. I always remember that.
Right.
The life in the desert was kind of bleak. When he showed that picture there of that area where they camped out, he mentioned, I think, that they were there for 2 years.
Yeah.
And just think about that. What do you do for 2 years?
I mean, they were
Out
not
in the
being
wilderness,
shepherds.
right?
They didn't have, they weren't.
They didn't have TVs and cell phones.
Oh, that's
And that's
true.
like 600,000 people in that area. I'm sorry, the thing I think about is also bathrooms.
Yeah, right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, there were
like-
no trees, you know.
No trees, no shade.
Yeah.
And I mean, if they didn't bring anything, they couldn't even plant crops. They had nothing.
Of course, out in the desert, during the day, it can be blistering hot, and then at night, it can be
Cold.
below freezing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, they didn't have water. I mean, that.
Yeah, well, they must have found water there. That's,
They must have-
that would be,
I think he did hit a rock and they got water there once or twice.
Right.
Moses.
generally, that's, you know, how they travel through the wilderness. They would be going from
Water.
one place of water to another.
Still.
Usually there would be trees there, things like
But you saw maybe one tree and like,
that.
and you like stand under the, I was watching a movie last night in Australia and they have deserts in Australia. And there's one tree in the middle of this like nothing. And there's like, you see the shadow of it. And then there's a like, and then where the leaves are like 6 feet away from where the tree is. Like, and I'm just kind of thinking that with looking at the desert. It's like, oh,
It took a long way, right?
yeah.
They didn't want to go through the forest, so.
Yeah.
That's-
And the only other right now is a live one. And it was my old one. It didn't fit me. Oh, it was one of
Okay. Let's see.
on the
There we go.
Okay. Lessons for leadership. Do I have a volunteer that wants to read it?
I'll read.
Okay.
Okay. So Exodus 18:13 through 27. Okay. Lessons of leadership. The next day, Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning till evening. When his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What is this you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge, while all these people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses answered him, "Because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and instructions." Moses' father-in-law replied, what you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice. And may you must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them his decrees and show them the way that they are to live and how they are to behave. But select capable men from people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide themselves. That will make your load lighter because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied. Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. He chose capable men from all Israel and made them leaders of the people, officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They served as judges for the people at all times. The difficult cases they brought to Moses, but the simple ones they decided themselves. Then Moses sent his father-in-law on his way, and Jethro returned to his own country.
Okay. So in his book, Hamilton points to 4 steps of shared leadership. One would be choose the right people, capable, reverent, and trustworthy. 2 would be train the people well. 3 would be empower and authorize them in front of the people they will be leading. And 4, make clear what needs approval and what they can decide on their own.
Kind of an interesting way of putting it. When I think about how we do things in the church,
Yeah.
there's some similarities, but there's also some differences too.
I think number 3 tends to be something we don't do. We'll train people and say, okay, you can do that, but then we don't put them in front of the people they're leading and explain, this is going to be the leader of the team right now. And, you know, he's empowered to run this team and we'll go forward and see how things go. But I never saw that happening within even
Yeah,
within
we
my
always
job.
have an insulation of the council, but if
Right.
people don't show up for that particular service, or if council members don't show up for it, well then, you know, it lacks something. And even just one installation is only a one-shot deal per year.
Okay. So many Christians think that they hire a pastor to do all the work of the church. What do you think?
Well, that's the way it was when I was growing up. Pastor did
Yeah.
everything. Pastor
Yeah.
Dragon, I was growing up at Ascension. And I know my dad was on council, but I didn't understand what council actually was.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think that word is higher, right? Higher.
Yeah.
Yeah, higher, that's right.
Yeah, I think you're right, Sue. I think back in the day,
Yeah, and it's,
Back in the
65, I was
day,
confirmed in
yeah.
65. And actually, I think the first time I actually realized that there was other leaders was when I was in confirmation. Because there was another gentleman that was teaching confirmation class. They had lay people teaching
yeah,
confirmation.
yeah, yeah.
Which was, I the 1 year that we went for 2 years.
Huh.
Well, my concern has always been about the pastors who believe that.
Yeah.
That they have been hired, first of all, that they've been hired, not
Yeah.
called, and that they are expected to do all the work, and they go about trying to do that. And I've known pastors, for example, that have to type out every worship bulletin every single week, and then make sure that it gets run off. And after it's run off, they've got to fold it, and then they've got to put it where the ushers can find it, and so on and so forth. You know, that's, and I remember when I first came here, people were telling me all the time that the pastor who started the church used to be down there scrubbing the floors in the bathroom and so on, to make sure that everything was perfect for people for Sunday morning and so on. And I think, wow, that's an interesting task for a pastor to carry out.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So what are the benefits of shared leadership for the people? Are there benefits for those with whom leadership is shared? And are there also benefits for the community as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. How can the pastor prepare his message so that the people have a good message if sweeping up the fellowship hall?
Yeah, it's part of it.
Right.
I've always thought of it. I've tried when I was the council president, and hopefully now as an intern too, I try to take stuff or do things for the pastors, so it's not as trying to, do everything. But also empowers other people.
Yeah, that's a big.
Yeah.
You do.
It gives people an opportunity to work within their gifts for the body of Christ.
Exactly.
Pastor, we went, I can't remember where it is at the moment. I'm trying to look. But we went over scriptures this last year that we talked about the body of Christ and how it works and how everyone's been given us gifts and abilities to be able to work within the church. I remember we talked about that.
We did, and we have to recognize that a lot of other people, not myself, other people have gifts that they can use that I don't have. You know, and we have to be open to letting them do that and letting and encouraging them to use the gifts that they have.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think the key word is shared. There is that sense of sharing to some extent is permission giving. Giving permission to people to participate actively. You know, somebody comes up to me and says, you know, Pastor, can I do such and such? And it might be something that I was planning to do myself. So part of my discipline is to say, sure, go ahead. You know,
Yeah,
they may not be able to do it even as well as I can do it, but it's better that they do it.
right. Yeah, I don't know why, but Donna Haller comes to mind of, she does so much with the teenagers, and, you know, she does it all on her own, but she does a, you know, phenomenal job.
Mhm.
And, you know, it's her gift that she's really able to work with them. And she does it. You know, where would we be if we didn't have people like that doing those things? You know?
You also
Yes, exactly.
look at it from the viewpoint of the congregation, that the person who is leader is sharing that benefit with the congregation.
Yeah.
It's not something that they benefit from it, but probably not as much as the congregation does.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
And when I think when people see that others are doing things in the church, they'll say, wow, I could do something like that, or encourages them. You know, that it's not always just the pastor doing things, that it's lay people that are doing things. And I think that when a lay person steps up and does something, it encourages somebody else to do it. And you have to encourage other people.
Right.
Well, but it gives ownership also, and I think that's a big piece of it. This is our church. It's not just one person's church.
Exactly.
You know, if you see a piece of paper laying on the floor, you pick it up because it's our church.
Right. It's just like your home.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think even more so because it's God's home.
And, you know, I liked what Sheila said in the beginning, kind of like all been given different gifts.
Right.
That's what it's really about.
And that was 1 Corinthians chapter 12. I wanted to make sure I looked it up. So it talks about the gifts and giving them in diversity in that chapter. So, yeah.
So I don't know, how is shared leadership carried out in our congregation? Do we embody an understanding of shared leadership?
I think we do. We have
Oh, yeah.
teams. We don't have
Yeah,
committees, and I think we accomplish things. We really support each other. I think
Yeah.
our teams.
Yeah, I see a lot more shared leadership in this church than I've seen in others, if that's something to compare.
We're working on it.
And yet, as you take Jethro's scheme there for Moses, there's that sense in which you need to go beyond 2 levels. So in other words, Moses is the leader, he gets 2 others to help him lead, but he's really got to they've got to get more people and so on, kind of like a pyramid,
Right.
to
right.
coin a phrase in the Egyptian language.
Right.
Um,
And I think we've done that with council because it's actually
Yeah.
12 of us and we're all part of each of the teams that we've created. And
Yeah.
I think that's the start of it. And
But-
then
Yeah.
again, the other part when we're saying we're empowering these people to be represented, you know, to the congregants to go to them if they have an issue. It's like so that of conflict or you know, ideas or whatever.
But then he did say bring the really difficult
Right.
cases
I think we do that.
to Moses, right? And just, I mean, this is a silly example, but on Saturday at the wrestling thing, Donna Haller came over and asked my husband for permission to do the raffle. And it just struck me as that was so respectful that, you know, she wasn't going to go ahead and just do this. You know, I thought that was very respectful.
Yes, that is. Because even though he's the pastor and we want to try and help him as much as possible, we have to we shouldn't take it upon ourselves that we're the boss. He's the
Right.
boss, you know, even though we try and help him as much as possible, or either he or her. But, you know, that is very respectful,
Yeah,
and
Yeah.
that's the way it should be.
yeah, it was just
Well,
a
he-
little thing, but.
But
yeah.
he knows more of the rules and regulations also. He's got a higher level of knowledge that we do
Yes.
not have. And that's why he's our leader.
Yes,
But he doesn't have to do all the work.
Because the other side to that is I think things could get very dangerous
Oh,
if
absolutely.
people just went ahead and did whatever they felt was the right thing to do.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so how are leaders nurtured and inspired? Are there aspects of leadership that could be strengthened? If so, what are they? Any thoughts on that?
I think nurtured and inspired is just asking them first of all.
What?
There's a lot of asking them, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Chewing on my tongue. A lot of times people won't step forward. They have leadership qualities that were probably very strong in their
Mhm.
careers.
Yeah.
And sometimes they just have to be asked.
Exactly.
We're finding that a lot, and they're saying,
Yes.
"Oh, I'll do that." And that leadership quality of that particular person can be shared with other people that are in leadership that are not as strong, and then we build each other up.
Yep.
Right. Right. So,
Shifting gears.
moving on to the role of sacred spaces, the tent of meeting. The author compares the tent of meeting with the portable thrones of Pharaoh in Egypt. What parallel does he note? Why does he observe that the similarity should come as no surprise?
I guess it's maybe God, well, thinking about what God's thinking, maybe God didn't want to make it so different from the normal environment that they would say, I don't want to do that kind of thing, because it's not what it's not familiar. He changed so much to begin with, and
Right.
human beings just, he could take so much, and because then
Right.
we've got a little bit of pushback there.
However, I do have a thought, if it's okay. Since the Egyptians really didn't believe in God, but I believe that they were influenced by demonic presence. This is just a thought, but these fallen angels, whoever it was that influenced them for their religion in Egypt, they knew about heaven. The things that they brought with them or they influenced these people to do were not quite like heaven, but they brought the same ideas to these people. However, when God met with Moses, he actually gave him the design of what was in heaven. That's just a thought.
Well, what were the tabernacles or the church, the temples, what were they like before they became Egyptian slaves?
I don't think they had, I think that, didn't they worship at just altars? Abraham didn't build a temple.
Right. So
Right.
this is a whole new thought pattern that,
Right. So, I mean, it's just a thought that I have, but.
But there's a difference between the tent of meeting and a temple. If you look at those temples that he showed, those are massive, permanent kind of structures that are built out of stone and so on and so forth, and they're still around. Whereas a tent of meeting was portable. It was like these guys that came last Saturday. They set up that tent of meeting right there in the center, that ring, and that's where everything went on. They started setting it up around 10 o'clock in the morning. By 5 o'clock at night, it was out of there. It was gone. Theoretically, it could have been moving on to another location, you know? Or I think of, how circuses used to be. They would come into town, they would set up their circus tent and all their things and so on, and you have like a little village there. But then all of a sudden it's gone. And, maybe a lot of trash around, but, there's evidence that they were there, but the tent of meeting is gone.
but the thing is, where did they get all the, I don't know, I guess fabric to to
They
build
made
it.
them.
I wondered about that too.
They made it
Also,
Out of what though?
out
Yeah.
of cotton and out of, I
From
mean,
where?
they grow cotton in Egypt.
Oh,
Well, when they left Egypt, don't forget, the Egyptians gave them gold. They gave them all that stuff. They said, just take it, go. They actually, they were like plundered.
under the
What is the word? Let me
spoiled,
find-
spoiled or plundered the Egyptians.
There wasn't a war. They just left, but it was, there's a scripture in Exodus that talks about that.
Well, they got so much that they
That was the
told them to
goal.
stop,
Yeah.
stop building what they had. but
They
it's
brought
just
it
like,
with them,
they're
yeah.
in the wilderness for 2 years.
yeah. I was thinking the same thing. Yeah.
So anyway, it was a temporary structure. It was one that, when they moved to another location, they would take it down, pack it up and carry it along. It's kind of like the canopies we have at the church. I was thinking, last summer we were having these services out in the parking lot and you have the canopy over the altar. It's very much like the tent of meeting. Really. And then after the service was over, it all came down. And if you came by, 20 minutes later, you'd never know anything was going on there. It's really interesting.
Now,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
tent of meeting, was only temporary for like 2 years, right? Because then after that, they
Well,
went
for the whole 40 years.
for
that
the
it
40
traveled.
years, but they actually didn't, they
They carried it.
traveled for two years, and then they got to inside of the promised land, and then they were there for many years.
Well, it took them 40 years to get to the promised land, but when they got there,
Yeah, they didn't,
they had it
it
with
wasn't
them. yeah.
until Solomon that they built it.
And just to answer your question, to go back about that one question about where did they get it all? It's going to be Exodus 12 and starting the 35th verse. It says, now the children of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, and they had asked from the Egyptians articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they granted them whatever they requested. Thus they plundered the Egyptians.
There you go.
Ah.
So that-
No, but a Bible study helps.
Wow.
Thank you very
Well,
much.
actually,
Okay.
Sheila helps. She's like, wow.
Yeah, well,
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
that's one of her gifts.
Yeah.
All right.
All
Answer
right.
the question.
Why don't we move on?
So, yeah, and then he goes into a discussion. In the past, churches were built differently from the way they are now, as visible reminders of God's presence. And in his book, he talked about the very ornate, very fancy kind of churches. But then he says, what structures in today's world provide the most meaningful and inspiring architecture? What, if anything, does this indicate about our culture and our priorities?
Well,
Oh,
Mm.
you could
Well,
make
the
a
glass stained
It was
endless-
almost
windows,
500
right?
years they had the tabernacle.
Yeah, the glass stained windows, really inspiring.
Mhm.
I had
That's true.
the pleasure, I guess you guys have been to Germany, to Germany, and we went to Regensburg, and we went to a cathedral that was built like in the between 13 and 1500, and it was all stone, and it was not ornate. It was the top of it was just stained glass. Then we went to the other side of town, and it was all Baroque, and it was all this gold and these statues and
goodness,
everything. So
yeah.
it was just really, and then the Lutheran church was right in the middle, small, plain, not ornate at all, like very simple.
Right.
And but it was right in the middle of the town. It was just very interesting, and you see the different eras. I think is how you see how they got fancier.
Well, I think
Right.
the more ornate churches were built as funeral for the kings or something, right?
And-
They.
Oh, yeah, it took a lot of wealth to build a big church.
A lot of time also.
Yes.
Right.
Today, nowadays, if you go into Manhattan, for example, there are buildings there that, are very inspiring in terms of the architecture. They have nothing to do with God,
Right.
but the gods of this world
Yeah.
are
Mhm.
manifested there. It's been a while since I've been in New York City, so I really can't say much
We have
about
St.
it.
Patrick's, who's very old world.
I'm talking about
And then-
secular buildings now.
Oh, it's secular.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because that's what the
Very
question is talking
But
about.
the churches do still stand out because they're very old
Mhm.
designs and stuff, and even the Jewish temple we used for Bishop Rimbaud's installation. That place was amazing. And it
So the
was,
question here is
Yeah.
about buildings in our culture today, which are not religious, which are not built for the church,
I went.
but they are built as places to be inspired. Lincoln Center, something like that.
Guggenheim.
Yeah, Guggenheim Museum. There are other buildings. I'm sure the Freedom Tower probably doesn't have knotty pine walls and so on. I'm sure it's probably pretty fancy
actually,
inside.
it was more impressive was the
This one.
Trinity Church across the street from it. That's still standing. So,
So I think the money that's being spent on architecture these days is not being spent on churches, but they're
Right.
being spent on
Wow.
secular, institutions and so on. Colleges, places like that.
there's, well, even, yeah.
Government buildings even sometimes.
I don't think any new churches are being built here on Long Island, right?
And that's what I'm saying. This
I-
is really asking about what we are investing money
Yeah.
in today, other than churches.
Churches. Right.
The most modern, inspiring building I've been in was when I worked for Aramark doing installing coffee machines, and I got to go in the executive levels of the Johnson & Johnson building.
Oh.
And in New Brunswick, again, it looked like it must have cost $1 trillion to be on the floor, and you needed a special key, and that would be the only time in my life I would ever be in a place like that. But then when I was in the big church in South Florida, and the 9th biggest church in the country, which was it was very modern, but there was nothing inspiring about it. It was all about practicality,
Yeah.
and the pastor would always refer to it as a warehouse.
Oh, lovely.
There was nothing. Yeah, there were nice seats, but it reminded me of like an airport or something like that, because they didn't spend any extra money on like stained glass windows or anything. It was all
Yeah.
practical needs. Yeah,
Yeah.
they
well,
probably didn't have the money. I'm like, I'm not going to spend extra money if they don't have it.
Well, it's not important to them. They don't look at it. That's old stuff. You don't
Yeah,
see
it
a lot
could
of
be.
stained glass.
I
today.
don't. Yeah, I don't know why.
But if you think about it, if you go all out, build a big fancy church, that's it. That's a lot of resources. And what is that for? That's for the people that come there to enjoy it. But really, could those resources be used in a better way? By helping other people kind of thing. So
Well, that-
I think
and
that's the other side to it.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
is a comment is made in there
Yeah.
about that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I guess there's two ways of looking at it.
Yeah.
I think the building, the church, I don't feel inspired or anything in some of these other buildings. Although I do have to say, when I went to the New York Library, that was like, but it's old and it
Yeah.
reminds me of our history
Yeah.
and stuff like that, but, but I don't know.
Yeah, and if you were allowed to go into the Capitol building, you probably could see a lot of very inspiring things there.
There's two fences around it, so
If
wouldn't
you
have
could
a
get
house.
beyond the fences and gates and
That's what I heard.
soldiers and
Yeah,
all
I
that,
heard that they took down one. but-
Arby's.
the army,
All right.
yeah. There was a time when you could do that.
Yeah, you could do a
Yeah.
tour.
Yeah.
Sacred spaces are.
Okay. Yeah, kind of what I was saying, rather than make large expenditures on buildings, some
Oh, yeah,
Christians
that's what you said.
prefer to put their resources into mission and outreach. What do you think about this issue? Yeah,
Makes sense.
You still need a gathering place, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You
right,
do.
right.
I mean, you don't have to be ridiculously over the top, but you
Right.
still need a building. Because the thing is like what we're looking at here to repurpose some of our space so that we can offer more things.
Mhm, mhm.
And sometimes you need a building to offer different
Oh, yeah,
activities.
yeah.
And I
Right.
think that's important.
Right.
And I think people, when they walk into a church that know about churches, they feel differently walking in the building. I think there's a different mindset.
Mhm.
Even people that are not that are unchurched, because pastors experience this, and I've seen it too. with baptisms. And we have baptisms and we know the family's baptizing, but you can see the people that are not comfortable in a church or don't know how to behave in a church.
Right.
We've seen that as well.
Right.
I think it's important though.
Yeah. And then he gets into, does your church building function as a thin place, in quotes? What are thin places in your world?
So what do we mean by thin?
Yeah.
What does it mean by thin places? I don't understand.
Explain that.
Yeah, that's weird.
Where heaven and earth meet,
Meet.
heaven and earth come together. I didn't know what that meant
What's,
either.
that island in Iona, is it Iona?
Yeah.
In the island, it's supposed to be a place like that, because it's
Right.
very, they feel God's presence there all the time.
Yeah, it's a very, unusual kind of a experience of, you're in a place that is just like every other place in the world, but because of various factors, there's something about that place that makes it different and makes it sacred. And a lot of it has to do with one's emotion. I just think, for example, of all the stuff that's being said about that riot that took place at the Capitol building in January. You know, for some people, that is a very sacred place. And, you know, a guy is going to jail for 8 months now because he went into the Senate part of that building and sat down there. Okay, so now he's got to be punished for 8 months in jail because he sat in that sacred place, the Holy of Holies for our government,
Well,
you know, and it's kind of an interesting thing. It shows, I remember my first year in seminary, there was a course called The Holy in the Common. And the whole thesis of the thing is that, you know, the world as we experience it with our senses and so on is very common. But for some reason, some things are no longer just common, they take on a special meaning or a special value, and so they become holy, you know. For example, you could have a piece of metal that is in a circle, you know, and size of maybe of a quarter, with a hole in the middle of it. And you could put it on your finger like a washer, you know, and that would be a washer. But if someone gives you that item while you are in church making promises to one another to live with and for one another for the rest of your life, then that washer takes on a different meaning completely, and it becomes a wedding ring. And so it has a holy quality to it that means something to you and to the other person perhaps, but from somebody else's point of view, it's just a piece of metal.
Yeah, but that's a sacred oath.
Yeah, exactly. Right, there's something that goes on there that invests a kind of a sacred quality to places and to things that is recognized by those who participate in them. For somebody who's not a participant, it's just another thing, you know?
It makes sense.
I think about the 6 months after I came here, we were supposed to have the assistant to the bishop was coming to do an evaluation of my ministry at 6 months. And I came into the church, and when I came in, I saw that the Christ candle had been smashed, that someone had urinated on the floor in the church in different places, and a few other things were broken and so on. And all of our equipment from the office and so on was gone, okay? And, you know, from their point of view, it was just, you know, a robbery and maybe some pranks or whatever. But from our point of view, it was a desecration, you know, had a different character to it. But that experience of a building or a place as a thin place, there are places like that throughout the world. When you go to the Holy Land, you know, there are places on that journey that have that quality to it.
Right. So the author asked, did God really need a tent to dwell among the people? How do you respond?
It really, yeah, because it's a special place, and that's where they can worship.
Perspective, if you believe that God travels around, it travels around because you take it with you. It doesn't travel around like some kind of butterfly.
Yeah.
You brought God to the tent. God didn't come there himself. You brought it.
Yeah.
Well, I think part of it is that you're expecting or you're experiencing God there in the tent.
It's like God having a home where he's inviting you in to meet with him.
But then if you meet
Good
with
point.
this dwelling place, then you're bringing God with you as you go out. So
Right.
it's your refreshment. You're
Yeah,
uplifting your food so that you can go out because you
Right.
know he's always.
Well, back before he sent the Holy Spirit to dwell in us, because now he abides in us,
Yeah.
we still had to go and meet with God. Well, God actually came, I don't know, he actually came to us. So I don't know how to explain it, but it's amazing to me. So
Well, God's always coming
Right.
to us. It's us to have. It's our humanness that have to accept what God is giving us.
yeah,
It's always coming down.
Now we have to avoid trying to hide from God like
Right.
Adam and Eve in the garden.
Right.
right.
You think of God as the experience of every molecule in the universe. You understand that you're made of God. You're made of the stuff of the stars.
Wow.
I think the question is backward. We needed a place because God
God is
couldn't,
everywhere.
because if God was there and there was no separation between us or the Israelites and God before Jesus, and there was no way to, no traditions and nothing like that, then God's holiness would be too close to the people, and they would just, like if God just appeared on the earth, the whole earth would be destroyed because his holiness can't.
But didn't God walk with Moses?
Yeah, he saw
Moses
his
had
back.
to wear a veil.
Yeah,
so that
exactly,
he
yeah.
Couldn't see God.
Yeah.
His face is so great.
Yeah.
And Enoch also. Enoch
Walk
traveled
with God.
to heaven. It's translated.
Wow.
Now, there's something about a place to go to that makes, gives a certain meaning to things. Just imagine if there were no churches, no church buildings at all, anywhere, or, like right now in Canada where people are burning down churches.
Oh.
Just think of how that is
I can't imagine.
affecting those people up there in Canada.
Must be
Wow.
devastated.
To find out the church is burned down, and well, where do you go? I was thinking about Good Shepherd Lutheran in over there in Levittown, and where do the people worship now? They have to find a place somewhere.
Right.
Or even the fact that our church building is a place where the Pentecostal church comes to worship, and Temple Tikva Israel comes to worship. They come to our holy place, and it becomes a holy place for them.
Right.
Yeah, kind of interesting.
Well, recently there was a burning of a statue in front of the church. I don't know whether it was Mary
Yeah,
or
somebody
what.
was knocking that statue down.
So that's like the first step. Now, what's the next step? The
Wow.
church?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
well, not for her. She got arrested.
right, so, yeah.
That kind of reminds me a little bit what you were saying about during the pandemic when you didn't go to the church building,
I don't-
Yeah.
but
Or
we-
home.
But I think it was our
if you want to call spirituality, it was our connection to each other that kept us strong. You know, I think if we didn't, we couldn't have be in the building, but we still were connected, even if it was with Zoom or whatever.
Right,
We didn't let that bond break. Yes. And I think that's really important.
The strength of the church is in a congregation, in people, not in a building.
Mhm.
You could, as you say, you could worship in a tent. It wouldn't
But
make any difference. The church gives it a more solid foundation.
Just imagine what it would have been like, though, for the past year if we had never done anything at all
right.
to worship, whether it be on the internet or any other fashion, like parking lot
That
or
would have been a
whatever.
wilderness.
So you imagine what that would do?
Yeah.
I mean,
That would
I,
have been- yeah.
you know, one of my recurring nightmares as a pastor of this church is that there are people in our congregation whom we may never see again. And, you know, they were told to not come to church and they may never come back. And I worry about that and I pray about that. But, you know, that's, it's not, you know, they're still the church, so to speak, but they're not. If they're not hearing the word, if they're not coming
Right.
together, if they're not praying together, if they're not reaching out to one another, working together, you know.
You're not the only, our pastor is the same way, you know, because we had to go to online, then we started meeting again, but then there were people who are still missing. They're not, yeah, so we understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have leaders in our church who have not been back to the church building.
Right. And as a, you know, I'm not putting you on a pedestal, but I can see that you have a true shepherd's heart, Pastor Hill, that you want the people to continue to learn, to continue to worship. So you have a true shepherd's heart. It's good to see.
That's a nice compliment. Sometimes I just feel like I smell like the sheep.
We're all sheep.
We've got to move on here. So explore grumbling in the wilderness. The whole Israelite community set out from Elam and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elam and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Right. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days." So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "In the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us?" Moses also said, "You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses told Aaron, "Say to the entire Israelite community, 'Come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling.'" While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. The Lord said to Moses, "I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God." That evening, quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is this?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent. The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. Then Moses said to them, no one is to keep any of it until morning. However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them. Each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers, for each person, and the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, this is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning. So they saved it until morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. Eat it today, Moses said, because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any. Nevertheless, some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather it, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the 6th day, he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where they are on the 7th day. No one is to go out. So the people rested on the 7th day. The people of Israel called the bread manna. It was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded. Take an omer of manna and keep it for the generations to come, so they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the wilderness when I brought you out of Egypt. So Moses said to Aaron, take a jar and put an omer of manna in it, then placed it before the Lord to be kept for the generations to come. As the Lord commanded Moses, Aaron put the manna with the tablets of the covenant law so that it might be preserved. The Israelites ate manna for 40 years until they came to a land that was settled. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan. Okay.
An omer is 1/10 of an ephah.
Whatever that is.
Clears that up.
That
So
works.
you have 10 overs equal an ephah.
They weren't happy eating all that manna though, because
Well, they ate it
getting
for 40
tired
years.
of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they thought of their life back in Egypt with the cucumbers and everything, you know, it was very tired.
Yeah.
Oh,
So we're talking about grumbling.
Yeah.
Describe a time when you were criticized as a leader in your family or in your workplace. How did you handle the criticism? How did you respond to those criticizing you? Did you listen? What did you learn? Have you ever been a critic yourself? Was your criticism constructive, or were you grumbling or complaining? Oh my goodness.
yeah, these are hard questions.
There's a lot in
Yeah,
there.
As a manager, I had to do evaluations, and that is not easy. And I never saw anybody in a bad light, so it was,
So you were criticized when you did an evaluation?
yeah, by my boss.
Wow.
They can't all be perfect.
Oh, right.
Oh, well.
So how'd you handle it?
Excuse me?
How did you handle it?
Oh, well,
Question number 2.
yeah, well, I told her, I said, well, what I see when I'm working with them, I think they're very good nurses. And I was honest, because they were. And it's very hard to do an evaluation on somebody.
Yeah.
But do a self-evaluation on yourself, because that's what she turned it around on me. You're gonna do your own evaluation.
Wow.
And it was the same
They
format.
always look for that. We had a thing where you had to actually evaluate someone else, but you always had to put in a way that they could improve.
Yes, absolutely.
You
You
know,
always had a comment.
always had to
yes.
put a negative. But I had an experience in my work when we changed our whole system of relating to the kids. And I saw this new system and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was really how we should be treating the kids. And most people were very against it. This is never going to work. You know, this is going to be this is going to be that. I mean, it was like an incredible negativity, and I just really felt it was the right thing, and we went ahead with it, and
Well, it's
it
like,
worked out quite
we
well.
were talking about this the other day. Every time you got a joint commission evaluation, or you're doing this wrong, and 5 seconds later, you had to change your daily routine. You
Right.
know, so it was like, and it was criticism, and it was saying, this is working. Why are we changing it so that it's not gonna work?
Yeah.
So you know, and that's the most
Yeah.
frustrating part of criticism.
Right. Right.
Don't
So
break it,
when you listen to your critics, then you discovered things that you needed to do that really were not going to work.
Mhm. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, Joint Commission's famous for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's your hospital.
So what did you learn from that experience?
Well, you had to do it. And then there was, I guess you would say we created workarounds to make it work.
Well, I don't know. I learned that if you really believe in something, you should go ahead with it. And, you know, that's how I felt about what we were doing.
Right.
And I mean, I felt it was just a much better way to treat children, and, you know, it was the right way. It was not what we were doing 25 years ago, where you had, you know, all these consequences for kids, and, you know, but it was hard. It was hard.
Yeah, situation right now. We went to that mother baby care at St. Charles, and we really were not thrilled with it because we felt moms need to get a lot of rest when they're in the hospital. They're not going to get it when they're getting home. And apparently it's showing up in Press Ganey's because they're not happy.
Yeah.
These mothers are going home exhausted. They want 5 minutes apiece. I mean, you know, it's not working. And then around the country, they say, oh, it's great, it's great, it's great. Yeah, it's not working in New York. So demographics play a big part of it too.
So sometimes the criticism can be wrong.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's interesting.
And I've had a few circumstances where I've had to just walk away from the situations and the environment, because I'm not very aggressive at speaking my mind. And so therefore, over my lifetime, there have been situations that I know things were wrong and were being done wrong. And so I had to exit those situations and find new situations. And sometimes you just have to let go of the past.
right.
Yeah.
Well, people don't want to listen to you when you say, I don't think this is going to work.
But not necessarily that it's not going to work. You just don't agree with what's being done.
Right.
And the people or the person in charge said, you know, you can't say anything against because it's their way or no way. And so you just have to walk away sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's the
But but amazingly, God always opens up another door, and you just have to think positive, and God leads you someplace else.
Yep.
Anyway, I have to leave, ladies and gentlemen. I will return on Thursday.
All right. Take care.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
I don't know. I guess she's coming
One in
back.
the word.
Oh, one in the word.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So now encounter the paralysis of fear. Summarize what happened after setting up camp just a few miles from the promised land.
Oh, that's when they sent out a couple of people, well, a bunch of people to see what was on the other side.
They were afraid.
Yes, because
They
they
sent
were
out the scouts.
enemies.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And
We're
they-
like grasshoppers in your eyes.
Oh,
The
wow.
Nephilim are there. That's what they said.
And so they camped
Yeah,
out.
you
for
don't know
another-
about the Nephilim?
No, I've never heard that word.
But they weren't all afraid, right?
No, they were not all afraid.
But they camped out for how many more? 30 something.
38 years,
Yeah.
that the other part of the,
Yeah.
Well, God didn't let them in for 38 years. Yeah.
Paralysis of fear.
Hmm.
What are things you have feared? Have you been paralyzed by fear? How did you overcome your fear? In what ways might fear prevent us from entering the promised land of a more fulfilling life? That's a biggie.
Thank you.
Well, fear has certainly been the big word of the year for the past
Yeah.
year, right?
Oh,
People
yeah.
are afraid, and they're not just afraid of the virus, they're afraid of one another
Mhm.
because they've been told that that little child can infect you and that will kill you.
Yeah.
Or,
It's, we're living in an environment right now, totally fear. And then
yeah,
every day they keep pounding it in the news. It's, constantly being reinforced. And then when you hear about the inner city looting and everything like that, I mean, it's.
yeah, the things that are
create that
going
fear.
on in society at the same time that
Yeah.
the pandemic is going
Right.
on.
Causing
Yeah.
all that disruption too.
Yeah, I was thinking, a few weeks ago, our son went into the city, and so on, and they had a nice time. And I was thinking to myself, for years I've joked about the idea of going into the city just to see what New York City, and but lately I've stopped joking about that because I'm really kind of afraid to go in there,
Oh,
for what's going to happen. Or think about the youth gathering that's coming up in Minneapolis next summer. And I'm
and that
still,
was really
I'm not going to be
disruptive.
going to the youth gathering, but I'm thinking, I
There was a
I
lot
sure
of
hope that
bad stuff going on.
between now and then, that city of Minneapolis will be changed. Let's put it that way from the way it is right now. Yeah, a lot of fear.
I mean, right after 9/11, the fear that was covered in this
Oh.
whole country,
Yeah.
That mean,
Yeah.
it's like we live from episode of fear to episode of fear for some reason.
Right.
It's just, I don't know,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Paralyzed by fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, our time
Okay,
is
so
rushing
wrapping up
away.
4 lessons Moses learned in the wilderness. Ask for help. None of us can make it to the promised land alone. Sacred spaces matter to God and are reminders of God's presence in our midst. Grumbling, criticizing, and complaining are part of life. Don't give up. When we face the giants that make you afraid, trust God. So, all right, closing prayer. God of the covenant, we give thanks for your enduring presence in our lives. Help us be aware that you are with us in our wilderness wanderings. Walk alongside us, both in our wanderings and as we seek to be ever closer to the promised land. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Okay.
So we got
One more, right?
one more.
I'm going to shut this.
Oh, the rest
Think of the people that were in that building in Florida that collapsed,
Oh my gosh.
And,
Yeah.
Well, that's another fear, these people living in the high rises, did the builder do it right?
yeah, and the people in New York now, in Germany, with
Yeah.
the floods,
That's-
just destroying
that's-
everything. Yeah.